So I'm Joe Allen. I'm the Executive Director of the Bayh-Dole Coalition, and on behalf of the Bayh-Dole Coalition, we'd like to welcome you to our Faces of American Innovation event. This is really a special occasion, not just for honoring our award winners up here, but this is the 45th anniversary of the Bayh-Dole Act, which is really pretty significant. The Economist Technology Quarterly said the law was, quote, possibly the most inspired piece of legislation to be enacted in America over the past half century. More than anything, this single policy measure helped reverse America's precipitous slide into industrial irrelevance. And as somebody who was actually on Birch Bayh staff, that's really not an exaggeration. We were at a time then where the U.S. is losing its lead, and we were projected to lose even more of our lead, but that didn't happen. So today we're celebrating not only the passage of the landmark law, but also the people who made its promise a reality, represented by this year's recipients of the 2025 Faces of American Innovation Award. To kick things off, we're honored to have Congressman Kevin Kiley with us this morning. Representative Kiley went from teaching high school English to becoming a prominent attorney who prosecuted China's Huawei Technologies company for intellectual property theft. Today, he represents California's 3rd Congressional District, serving on the House Judiciary Committee, which oversees Bayh-Dole, the Education and Workforce Committee, and the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. The Bayh-Dole Coalition greatly appreciates the congressman coming over here. Congress is in session, so having somebody who has the time to come and talk to us is actually no small thing. So, Congressman, we'd give you the podium, and thank you very much for joining us.
All right. Well, good morning. Welcome for those of you who are coming from elsewhere to DC. It seems like the humidity all arrived in one day today, so get to enjoy that. But congratulations to the honorees as well. I think that in my time working on pro-innovation policy and IP policy, it's really having the opportunity to talk to inventors and innovators that I think has provided the most powerful testament to the need to change the policies around an environment for innovation in our country. And I think, we just heard Joe saying, it's Joe, right? The opening remarks about how, prior to Bayh-Dole, there was this sense that we were falling behind. And unfortunately, I think that we have kind of reached a similar moment for the United States when it comes to where we are in relation to some of our geopolitical competitors in certain key technology areas. And that's alarming because I think that probably, this generation, perhaps more than any other, is going to be defined by who is ahead in these key technology areas. So I think that when we're talking about things like Section 101, subject matter eligibility under the patent laws, maybe it sounds a little arcane for those who are outside of circles like this one, but the stakes are really enormous. It's not just about providing fairness to inventors, although it is about that, and it's not just about assuring the innovation that allows us to have continued prosperity in our country. It's about that too, but it's also about the standing of our country and our ability and our competitive edge and all of the geopolitical perils that we face if we fall further behind. So to that end, I've tried to find ways to work across the aisle, because this is a bipartisan issue for sure, on pro-innovation policy. And I want to say, by the way, thank you for everyone here for what you've done over the years with the Bayh-Dole Coalition to serve that purpose, to protect this law. We've seen recently they can't take anything for granted, and to work together towards these goals that are so important for what the U.S. is all about. But one of the things that I'm really excited on that I think we've started to make some real headway on is this issue of subject matter eligibility under the Section 101. It's become this sort of morass of judicially created tests and kind of precedents that are difficult for lower courts to apply. And you don't need to take my word for that. The judges themselves have complained about it repeatedly, including, I think, at one point, all of the judges on the federal circuit. And so it's cried out for some sort of legislative resolution. And that's what we're trying to do with PARA, the Patent Eligibility Restoration Act, which is bipartisan, bicameral legislation. Congressman Peters is my co-author in the House, and then we have, I think you heard from Coons earlier, or Tillis, one of the two. Tillis, okay. Anyway, they're leading the effort over in the Senate, and it's one of those bills that is a real process. You know, it's some bills you can kind of like address something that's a pressing issue, and then boom, boom, you get it done. This is one that's been a multi-year effort, but I think that we're starting to see things move in the right direction. And the basic idea here is that we're looking to provide certainty where the courts have created uncertainty. And so we're going to, we provide sort of narrowly defined exceptions for things that are not patentable, but then say that other things are. And so there are some exceptions, for example, requiring, you know, around naturally occurring genes, or when it comes to computer-created processes that are of economic or financial significance. But you know, aside from that, it'll vastly, or you know, in a very reasonable way, expand the sort of things that are patentable. As another example, there's this question right now about the use of AI, that if somehow you use AI in the process of creation, oh wait, is that now something that's not created by a human? I don't think that's really a relevant standard, or what the standard ought to be. I mean, I think that inventors have always used different tools in the process of creation, but as the inventor, you're the one driving the use of those tools towards your idea. And by the way, just because something can be patentable under Section 101 doesn't mean it doesn't have to meet the other tests, right? And so under the non-obvious inquiry, we're talking about a person of ordinary skill in the relevant art, and such a person would have access to, like, whatever, ChatGPT or whatever the relevant tools, AI tools are, you know, AlphaFold or whatever the domain might be. So I think that that's important, is not to have this sort of arbitrary bar. And so we seek to so we put that in there as well. And as the final prong is that we, well, there's a lot of things, but the final significant one relates to discovery. So this has been a favored tool of infringers to try to kick these cases out of court, is to challenge them on subject matter eligibility grounds, and then you don't even get discovery. And so we want to provide some limited discovery even on that kind of threshold question, so that you know, that process cannot be abused in that way. So we're hoping to get this through committee, get it marked up this term, and if we do, I think that it's not going to in itself close this innovation gap that we're seeing between us and China in key areas, but I think it will be an important step forward. But there's certainly a lot more we need to do in supporting basic research and gearing our entire legal system towards one that supports inventors, protects IV, and supports amazing innovators like these folks. So thanks very much for all of your work in helping with this cause. And if we have time, I don't know if I've used all my time, but happy to answer any questions.
Very much appreciate it.
Were any questions from the Congressman?
Well, let me ask one. It's really great as a former Senate Judiciary Committee staffer to have somebody who actually knows something about the patent system, which again, it can be an obscure issue. After this meeting, we're going to be having our folks meet with different delegations. How can we best explain to members of Congress on both sides, not just the importance of the patent system, but also the importance of public-private sector partnerships for really making sure we don't lose our competitive edge?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think that when you talk about what those partnerships have resulted in, and there are countless examples, I think that really drives the issue home for people. And so, you know, sometimes the arcana of Section 101 and everything else in patent law, or you know, whatever the relevant area might be, doesn't always resonate with everyone. But when you can talk about, here's what we've been able to produce, here's what we'd be stopped from producing, whether it be important therapeutics, important advancements in computing and quantum computing, and you know, the countless other areas, I think that that's something that'll resonate with people. And as I was saying at the outset, I think that also the stories of particular inventors, and when you pour your heart and soul into an invention that you came up with, this spark of genius you had, and you devoted everything to it, and then the fruits of your labor are just purloined like that, I think that that really strikes a chord with people as well. Oh, there's a gentleman back there.
I'll just speak up. Well, first of all, thank you for coming here. This is fantastic. And the work on para, I'm a patent attorney, so getting some clarity, whichever way it ends up, will be fantastic. But for those of us in the community, what can we do to help you get the legislation passed?
Yeah.
Who do we? Yeah, I mean, because there's communities out there, people have a vested interest and would love to see this pass.
Right.
And what can we do?
I think just try to educate your own legislator is probably the best approach. You're an expert in the area, being a practitioner, and so you can really explain it in ways probably better than I could. I mean, I practiced patent law for a little bit, but that was a while ago. So I think that's probably the best thing that you can do, and to try to sort of broaden the folks who are doing that. Like if you know like-minded people in your communities or in your professional circles, kind of enlisting them in the effort, and because this is kind of an interesting issue because the fault lines are not really partisan in nature. Like you have some, as you can see from our list of authors, you have some Republicans who agree with us on this issue and some who don't. You have some Democrats who agree and some who don't. I think that a lot of the disagreement stems from misunderstanding. So I think to the extent that we can resolve that misunderstanding, then it'll be really helpful in moving this forward.
Well, listen, you've been very gracious. We actually have 5 people here today who, because of their inventiveness using the patent system, have actually benefited literally millions of people's lives around here and around the world. So if you don't mind, before you have to disappear, we'd like to get a photo of you.
I'd be honored, absolutely.
So if you all can come out this way.
Thank you very much. Congratulations. Thanks, everyone.
The reason why the Bayh-Dole Coalition is up here today is there's a lot of people on Capitol Hill with different messages, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's what democracy is all about. But it's really essential that we inform people, as Congressman Kiley just said, why our issues are so critical and, frankly, why they should be supported on both sides of the aisle. So we really appreciate the support of our members. If you're not a member of the coalition, I hope you'll think about joining us because we can always use more voices there. But one of the best ways of communicating our message is in this current era is through videos. A lot of people will watch a video and won't read a policy paper. So what we'd like to do is show you a video we've made to celebrate the 45th anniversary of Bayh-Dole, featuring some of our members. So with no further ado, I'll get out of the way again, and the video people can hit the magic button.
I think the most fundamental achievement of the Bayh-Dole Act is that it has turned American universities into engines of innovation for the country and for the world. Before Bayh-Dole was enacted in the late 1970s, only 55 U.S. universities had even received one single patent. 30 years later, that number had increased fivefold. And in the first 20 years of the Bayh-Dole Act alone, there was a tenfold increase in academic patenting. Academic technology transfer has led to the creation of 15,000 startup companies who have received over 140,000 patents and over 200 new drugs. So Bayh-Dole is just absolutely foundational to America's national innovation system.
I think what has been accomplished is that we've demonstrated that there really is demand for public-private partnerships. Professors don't work on products, they work on ideas. They do something once or they do something twice, but they don't do it 100 times or 1,000 times. They don't manufacture it. And so therefore it can't be distributed at scale. And also in a university, you're allowed to make mistakes. In fact, you're encouraged to make mistakes, right? But the business community, they have to do something exactly the same way all the time. So there are complementary cultures. One of my jobs, or maybe even several of my jobs as an engineer, was because of Bayh-Dole. I worked at a startup that was enabled by a license to a patent that came from MIT. So it's very synergistic to have these two cultures work together. And I think that, to me, is the single greatest accomplishment of the Bayh-Dole Act.
Under the United States Constitution, intellectual property rights were so important to our founding fathers that they actually wrote in intellectual property rights into the text of the Constitution, and where it gives authors and inventors the rights to hold their inventions. And so for almost 150 years, this went along very, very well. There were more and more investments over time in universities. And what we found was, as the time progressed, that those inventions stopped getting out of the universities and got stuck on the shelf, largely because the government had rights in those inventions and they had the right to take them. And so when Bayh-Dole came along and they recognized the problem that no private investor was willing to invest in something where they knew it could be taken away from the government, they said, well, let's create the Bayh-Dole Act. And this has created a huge revolution in university innovation and actually getting those inventions off the shelf and into the marketplace where they are today. So it's a wonderful, wonderful story, very much aligned with the spirit of our founding fathers and the spirit of allowing people to realize their innovation in commercialization.
There's a number of challenges and opportunities that come up under the Bayh-Dole Act. One of the biggest things you have to think about, really, is you face these ideas of, shouldn't technology from a federal laboratory be free to everybody? Just give it away. And if you really think about that at the most basic level, we deal with it all the time in real property. You walk down a street every day. Sure, that's a public good. It's a use if you think about it from a real property perspective. But from an intellectual property perspective, it's really critical. If you want to put up a tent, that's just fine on that street. But if you want to build a house, if you want to build a business, you got to be able to know that I have property. I can define what that property is, where it is, what it does. I can go to a bank and I can get a loan. I can get an investor to give me some money in order to do different types of things. None of that's possible if it's just in the public domain. Anybody can enter your house. Anybody can use your stuff. So even if it's not an exclusive license, you still have the ability to define it and transfer it to business. That business can raise private capital. It's critical that that next step happens in translating those ideas into services.
So that's just an example of the kind of things we're trying to do, again, which should be of interest to members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, to make it plain English and explain to people why this is so important. But there's actually nothing that actually beats real people, because as a person who is a real person, not a 3D hologram, I always think there is something about actually being on Capitol Hill, being in meetings, and actually having people that embody what we were just talking about. And today we have 5 of them. The Bayh-Dole Act cut through the bureaucratic red tape that are preventing federally funded inventions from being turned into useful products, benefiting people here and around the world by decentralizing technology management from Washington and putting in the hands of the universities, federal labs, and small companies making these inventions. And the other thing I always make a point of mentioning is it did that without any increased funding from the taxpayer. and we didn't create any bureaucracy. And there's really not many laws that have actually made that much of an impact without either more spending or more bureaucracy, but Bayh-Dole did. But while the law made that possible, it doesn't guarantee success. That can only happen because of the dedication of those making and managing these inventions, and most importantly, entrepreneurial companies willing to invest the time, money, and assuming the considerable risk needed to turn early-stage inventions into useful products. Because we have such people, the United States leads the world in creativity, but other nations, including those who don't wish us well, are working hard to overcome our lead. So we need to recognize the people who actually are the ones that most of us benefit from, who are willing to take the risks that frankly other people won't take. And so what we'd like to do is quickly introduce our 5 award winners of this year's Faces of American Innovation Award that the Bayh-Dole Coalition put together to really show people not just how the laws and not just how the data works, but it really comes down to individual people who are willing to take an opportunity with no guarantee of success, and actually literally millions of people are alive around the world and living better lives because of people like this. So let me just quickly introduce who our winners are this year. Dr. Jim Dahlberg is the emeritus professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He was an early pioneer in biotechnology whose work helped identify disease-causing mutations in cells and viruses and helped create an effective test for the leading cause of cervical cancer. The technology was later licensed to help develop Cologuard, a revolutionary home colon cancer screening product that has been used by 19 million people. Work is now underway for detection of other diseases like cystic fibrosis. Vinit Najawan was inspired to be an entrepreneur. After leading several startup companies, he overhauled Boston University's tech transfer office, where he spun out several companies, including Beta Bionics, founded by a Boston University researchers to help his son, who was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, by creating an artificial pancreas. The company has supplied bionic pancreases now for 15,000 patients, including the founder's son. Vinit now leads Mass Ventures, a quasi-public-private venture fund focused on early-stage tech companies. Since 2020, Mass Ventures has backed 27 startups, 85% of which spun out of universities. Jennifer Pagan dreamed of becoming an opera singer, and we tried to get her to sing this morning, but she said she wouldn't do it. But maybe if we're nice to her, if we have some extra time, we'll get her to sing something at the end. Maybe not, but we'll at least try. She grew increasingly concerned about pathogens in global water supply, which kills more than 1 million people worldwide and actually sickens a lot more. And again, we take water for granted, but if you're living in a developing country and you have polluted water, you will drink polluted water rather than going without. So a lot of people don't have the choice of turning on a faucet and being comfortable that the water is safe to drink. After much hard work, she created an innovative flow cell using UV light as opposed to mercury to disinfect water. But like many Bayh-Dole inventions, her discovery was licensed by the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, to a local small company, which Jennifer later joined. She then used an SBIR grant, and the technology was refined, and Jennifer helped launch a new company, Aquasets. And like many Bayh-Dole spinouts, the company continues to benefit North Carolina by doing its R&D in the home state, which again is not unusual. Typically, when companies spin out of a university, they stay in the region, and this has become a driver of our local and regional and national economies. Today, Aquasense is disinfecting water on every continent and is also used on the International Space Station. Not content with that, which is pretty amazing, she's now working on trying to remove forever chemicals from our water supply. Dr. Mark Rohrbaugh found himself working at the National Institutes of Health because of a friend's suggestion while he was looking for a job. He heard about tech transfer from a guest speaker, and he was inspired to attend law school at night while he was working full-time at NIH during the day. Mark rose through the ranks, eventually leading the NIH Office of Tech Transfer, before becoming the agency's lead expert in Bayh-Dole. There are opponents, believe it or not, there are opponents of Bayh-Dole. They were here when I was on the Senate staff, and they still exist today. And so 20 years after Bayh-Dole was enacted, they created an alternative history of Bayh-Dole. And what they claimed was that if a technology was commercialized off of a federally funded invention, If someone didn't like its price, they could go to the government and the government would license a copier. The law clearly doesn't apply that way, but the proponents of it said they'd found a magic solution for lowering drug prices. And a lot of people in Congress and a lot of the media people latched onto that. So a number of petitions were filed at agencies, particularly NIH, trying to get them to march in on drug prices. So Mark Roboff was the person who had to handle that. But being a consummate professional, Mark looked at every petition and actually put it through its merits, which was basically, has the technology been commercialized? So what happened was, what happened was every administration, both Republican and Democratic, which looked at that, realized that the technology had been commercialized. The marching petitions were dismissed. But what happened was the political pressures increased. And so they went after NIH and went after Mark personally. Mark was actually threatened physically. But because Mark and NIH did not cave, the Bayh-Dole Act still works. We have literally millions of people alive today because we had a consummate civil servant. And finally, Dr. Christina Wildfire was offered a full scholarship to study engineering. But she had to Google what is engineering because that was not her career path she was likely looking into. But as she started her study, she realized that she actually really liked it, that she discovered a new field that she had a real capability for. So after a little bit, she was actually offered a job at the Department of Energy's National Energy Technology Lab in Morgantown to work on microwaves, which was, again, it's a field she really had no background in. But the lab said, we're all starting from new, so let's actually work together and figure out how microwaves really can help move forward. So what she found was she figured out a way to use microwaves to transform plastic, waste, and greenhouse gases into valuable energy resources. That would have a major impact on the problem of plastic waste, a major environmental issue. And her research was so significant that the laboratory actually created a Center for Microwave Technology. Later, a startup company was interested in applying for their invention, but they actually had another application for it, which again is not unusual, which is, I think, what people need to understand. They start doing research in one area, and because you have freedom in federal laboratories and universities, you can actually find other applications. And in this case, you had a small company saying, hey, could your technology be used to do something completely different? And their issue was, could we actually help recycle plastic waste from hospitals? That resulted in a cooperative R&D agreement with the laboratory, leading to a microwave reactor that transformed highly toxic waste into hydrogen, which can then be used to help the hospital as a backup power. So she took something which actually before could not even be put into landfills, it's so toxic, and now actually be something that's turned into is benign. But again, it actually had other applications because now she's working on NASA's Moon to Mars program to help recycle waste in space travel, and also working to use microwaves to extract critical minerals from coal waste, which, as you know, critical minerals is something that China is trying to deny us right now. So finding a way to getting that from coal waste is pretty significant. So please join me in congratulating our 2025 award winners. And if you find a way to solve the common cold, let me know. What I'd like to do is now throw out a couple of questions to the panel, just to have them talk about their experiences. So, Jennifer, I'm going to let you start off here. Now we'll let the rest of the panelists talk about this also. Innovation and entrepreneurship is a hard road to travel. There must have been many times when you woke up 3 o'clock in the morning and felt that what you're doing made no sense. It was hopeless. You should just give up and have a regular career like everybody else, go to work, leave at 5 o'clock. So why didn't you just quit?
There were more than one time that I wanted to quit and give up. I am one of the people that actually was the inventor, but then also went on to co-found and eventually become a business owner to commercialize the technology. So there were multiple inflection points in that journey that I wanted to give up. And those often coincided when funding was drying up for the technology. So there, there were, points when, I wasn't getting a paycheck, but I still believed in the technology. I was desperately trying to get someone to fund the company. There were friends and family rounds. That was the original way the business was founded. And, it's been multiple, things like that that have occurred along the way until you're mature enough as a business to kind of run on your own wheels. So I guess I would say I didn't give up because I believed that the technology could be commercialized, that it was for the greater good of the public. And I'm, just really pleased to be where we're at today, honestly. So.
Jim, did you ever feel like you just wanted to go back to bed and let somebody else start worry about this?
I didn't go back to bed. At 3 a.m. I was in bed. And yes, there were occasions and sort of worried about continued financing of the company. I had faith, as Jennifer said, in the technology, and we had strong intellectual property protection. So I knew that we could succeed if we just had the funding. And fortunately, we were able to get funding from the government. NIH has some grants, SBIRs, National Institutes of Technology, NIST, right? I mean, they gave us a very nice, well, that was very much, and then that helped in the critical times in our development. And of course, there were a lot of private investors who helped a great deal. And I still am good friends with many of those investors. So that shows that not only do they invest, but they invest for the long term too.
Christina, you didn't quit either, so how come you didn't just give up?
Yeah, so I would say that as a researcher in not only a federal lab, but as a federal employee, things have been a little challenging this past year, right? And I am very driven by my mission and my belief in the research and the belief in the labs, that we are here to do the work that needs to be done for the next 20 years. We're really looking into the future of what our nation needs as far as energy and in these innovations. And so that really is what drives me and keeps me going every day, is the people that I work with and knowing that I'm there to contribute to our future generations.
Vineet, you actually changed careers. You went from being a business owner to actually being somebody in Boston University and getting into tech transfer. So what really brought you into this? And again, how do you keep going every day when you're swimming against the tide all the time?
Well, the common theme are startups. So I started my first company as an engineering student. Subsequently, over 27 years, built 5 startups and exited all of them. I decided 15 years ago that rather than running companies, I would help other entrepreneurs. I like to say I went from being a parent to a grandparent. And so now my goal in life is to help them survive that 3 a.m. wake-up call when they're not sure how they're going to meet payroll because they haven't been able to raise money, or the technology didn't quite work and you have to pivot. Because I've been through it. And trust me, I've been through it. I bootstrapped a bunch of companies. I went several years without salary. We had young children. And I don't know how to explain it. I think we're all the same. You're driven by impact in the end. You want many, many, many people to use your products.
Well, Mark, you had a different experience. In fact, Mark is the first policy person we've ever given the award to. And also, Christina is the first federal employee we've ever given the award to. So this is, we didn't do that consciously, but those stories were so compelling. Mark, yours was a little bit different. You were actually under personal attack for defending the law that you knew was actually saving people's lives. So there must have been times when you thought, why am I doing this? Why? How come I have to be the person catching all these arrows from people who are personally blaming you for the reason they're high drug prices?
Well, it was this law and the statute and this process of licensing early stage technologies to companies to benefit the public is so important and was vital to our nation's welfare and economic condition, that there's no way I could back off from this position of doing what was right and what would profit us all in the long run.
And the other thing was, as a public employee, Mark was not allowed to defend himself. So you're being publicly vilified, and you also can't defend yourself. So I'm sure you weren't getting wealthy working at NIH, but again, there are people like Mark and that really do embody what civil service is all about. And again, if Mark had caved, if NIH had caved under Republican and Democratic administrations, and the pressure was fierce, including threatening NIH's budget if you don't roll over, but every administration held because Mark showed them this is not how the law worked. There are lives at stake, and in a charged political environment, that made a huge difference. So people really can make a difference. So let's go back to one of the big criticisms of Bayh-Dole is the critics say, well, the government's funding billions of dollars of research. They're funding research and development. So why don't we just give these technologies away? How much risk is really involved in commercializing government technology? So just throw this out to the panel. From your experience, if there really weren't private sector people putting their own time and money and resources into it, with no guarantee of success, would our system just work if in fact the government just said, hey, this stuff is free, come in and take it, it's good to go, it's ready for being, it's a product, you can go out and buy it. Is that the reality that you find? So Christina, how about you? Could somebody just have taken your original research and do what you're doing right now?
No. So I think the distinction is research versus intellectual property, right? We publicize our research, that's general knowledge, but the IP is important if you want to actually grow a business. So the company needs to feel secure that they have a competitive edge, that not everybody can do this to be able to raise funding. And our research, even at my lab, which is very applied, we think, well, we're developing technologies not very fundamental, so we're pushing the technology closer to commercialization. But in reality, these things are still 5 to 10 years out from becoming an actual commercial product. So it still takes a lot of capital, it still takes a lot of time to get to something that is that makes you money, that is an actual product from conception of the idea to something that you can take to market. So you have to have private public partnership to be able to actually grow a business.
Well, Vineet, you're like in one of the hotbeds of entrepreneurism in Boston, where there's as much venture capital as anywhere. There's much entrepreneurs. So when you're licensing out of BU or doing your startups, are there like companies lined up down the block to take these technologies, and do the startups just come in, get a license, and then go make $1 billion out in the market? Is that the reality of what's going on?
I wish that was the case. If that was the case, we'd all be rich. But the reality is, first of all, it depends on the technology, right? Everybody gets caught up with Silicon Valley and software startups. And yes, software startups need a lot less investment to get to market. But the technologies that we're all talking about here require tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of private investment. I like to say that the patent is the first inning of a 9-inning game. There's 8 more innings to go where you have to do tech and market development. And if everybody succeeded with a patent, yes, the universities wouldn't need federal research funding, but that's not what happens.
Mark, you were actually in charge of licensing for the National Institutes of Health. When NIH is licensing, first of all, did you have companies line up outside the door? And is NIH developing drugs, or is that the reality? Are people just looking online and saying, hey, there's a cure for cancer. I want to go in and license that and go out and mark it up as much as possible and make a bazillion dollars.
Au contraire, far from it. Um, Tech transfer professionals at universities and federal labs have a saying: a good day in a tech transfer office is a company interested in a technology. So it's a company interested in a technology. Most technologies are never licensed. That doesn't mean they don't have value, potential value. It's just that the risk is so high, the net present value could be zero. It has potential, but it has many hurdles and requires dedication of the type that we've talked about today, of people moving it through, investors who believe in it in the long term to get it to market. It's an idea, it's a concept. It doesn't always even have proof of principle. The failure rate is very high in the biotechnology sector, but fortunately, people and investors believe in the opportunities, and a few are willing to take the risk.
Well, Jennifer, you mentioned you've actually been a public sector researcher and actually somebody who started a company, and actually you mentioned that you even went without a salary. So it seems like if the government was funding research and de-risking these, that you would have been just printing up money and there was no risk in what you did. Things like AquaSense, how hard is it to start a new company and actually make money in the market? Or did the University of Charlotte, North Carolina, out of their generosity, just give you keys to the gold and you just turned the key and there you were?
Yeah, I wish. No, I mean, the University of North Carolina at Charlotte and Laura, they've been a wonderful partner in enabling us to have the exclusive license. But in terms of, I'll just share numbers because I think everyone can kind of clue into that. You talk about what the risk is. So federal funding, $1 million maybe, for that. What investors have put in AquaSense, what we've put in, it's about 60 million. So that's just, there's a much different level of risk being taken to build a company. So I think we need this, government funding of fundamental research, but there is a huge risk to commercialize the research and many more dollars spent on that side to actually bring products to market.
And Jim, one thing that people are debating right now is why should the government fund basic research? Is actually return on investment. So you're one of the people who actually, because of conducting basic research, really found something which has probably kept millions of people alive today. So is it important the government continues to fund basic research, and how important is it that our public sector researchers actually have the ability to look at, as we've had up on the panel, to find things which are sort of unpredictable outcomes of public funded research?
So it's absolutely essential. I mean, this is where the great discoveries are made when you're just curious about some phenomenon. In my case, it was a phenomenon where we could not explain a result. And I think one of the most important phrases in science is, gee, that's curious. I wonder why. And I think that's the motivation for a lot of the discoveries that have been made. Now, I'd just like to say that we haven't had the ability to raise money. We would not have been a successful company.
Right.
And I also want to say that one of the other hats that I'm wearing in Madison is I'm on an advisory panel for a venture investor firm, and I get portfolios to look at. Okay. First question I look at, second question is what is going on? What are they trying to do? But the most important question is how strong is their IP? Are they going to have competition that they can't beat? And that isn't a no-brainer from if they don't have a strong IP, we're just not interested.
Well, that's actually an interesting thing because I was staying in Crystal City last night, and on a lamppost was a bumper sticker saying intellectual property is censorship. Who knows who's putting this up? But let's talk about that because again, the people that don't like Bayh-Dole also don't like the patent system. Their view is that if the government funds research, it should be given the public domain, that if it's in the public domain, more people can use it, it'll be more equitably distributed, the prices will be lower. So our patent's important. In fact, before Bayh-Dole, we had a system just like that. It didn't work. I don't know why they think it would work again if we try it harder. It's like socialism. It just hasn't been tried hard enough yet. But let's just throw the question out there. If patents weren't available, would any of your technologies have been commercialized? Anybody?
No.
No.
I think, people fundamentally don't understand the patent system. I didn't know anything about it until I came to the VU Tech Transfer Office. It's a fascinating concept where the government basically gives you the right to have a monopoly for 20 years on your idea or your invention, but you have to disclose everything about it to the public. So in a way, you're doing both things. You're actually making it a public good because anybody can see how you invented it and they can improve upon it and file their own patent and have a 20-year monopoly. It's a system that has worked brilliantly in, that and double entry accounting are the two big inventions of the Western world, right?
Right. So would your technologies, if they were just in the public domain, if you just published them and that was the end of it, would they be doing what you're doing now?
No. And I think we have some very clear examples, even from my own lab, where IP and patenting wasn't a priority because, we feel like we're using public dollars to do the research. And so we should just publish. We should just get this information out. But once the information is out, then companies can't use it because it's not, it gives them no competitive edge. And so we do have to weigh the pros and cons of, do we feel like there is a market value here to go into patenting versus do we just publish this? This is a daily conversation that we have as researchers.
Well, Mark, you actually were in charge of licensing for NIH, so you had the ability to issue exclusive or non-exclusive licenses. So why wasn't everything just licensed non-exclusively?
For the same reasons that investors would not invest in business people would not develop a business around a technology that they couldn't protect. If a piece of land was not owned by a person, why would that person build $1 million mansion? If it was a piece of land that anybody could build on, you'd have tents, as the video suggested, and not mansions. It just wouldn't happen. And it's important to remember that the vast majority of prescriptions in the U.S. are for generics. We wouldn't have those generics, low-cost generics, if there hadn't been patent protection for the brand name before they became generics.
Yes,
I think that person who put up the sticker wants to live in a tent.
well, I think there's people who have actually never built anything and just sort of think these things come out automatic. It's Animal Farm, but I don't think they teach Animal Farm anymore in universities. So, or if they do, they probably teach it as a valuable economic system. But let's ask another question, which never really gets asked, but I think is really critical. Under the Bayh-Dole Act, again, it's decentralized technology. Here, our theory was the people actually making these inventions know more about how to manage them than Washington does, and not being disparaging. But again, if you're not really the person there that owns them and has an incentive for it, you're not going to be up at 3 o'clock in the morning worrying about it. But also under our system, it's industry that takes the risk. So when you're having your company's funded, you've raised your venture fund, you've really tried really hard and it didn't work. Does the government come back and say, geez, you tried so hard, you lost $1 billion or $100 million, you've taken 10 years of life. Does the government actually make that up for you? Do you get a check somewhere from somebody who says, hey, good try, kid, maybe it'll work better next time? Or who takes the hit when this, somebody's losing money. Who takes the hit when these things don't work?
Yeah. Oh, that would be me. I would take the hit if my company does not, and my investors. So it's that the business owners take the hit.
The owners do too, of course. And when we started our company, The founders pulled our personal resources together, and we borrowed some equipment from people that had extras. But things like the refrigerator and freezer for biochemicals, we didn't buy it from one firm, we bought it from another company because there were no payments due until July. So we would take the hit.
And I should also actually mention that one of the founders of the Bayh-Dole Act was the University of Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, which actually did a lot of the work on Bayh-Dole. And it was Jim's technology, which is the first time they actually licensed a startup company. And what they decided was, because it was a startup company, they were going to forego the usual fees and royalties and just take a percentage of the company because they had no money. So if they hadn't done that, the technology would probably still be sitting there. But that's again why decentralization is so important, because they could have gone by our formula. We don't do that. But they realized this formula doesn't work in this situation. And so the genius of Bayh-Dole is we said, you decide. You decide what makes the most sense. And again, to their credit, at that time, licensing a startup company was unheard of. Now it happens all the time. And again, when we passed Bayh-Dole, I can guarantee you as a staffer who worked there, we didn't think about startup companies. But it evolved that way because the market drove it that way. And entrepreneurs work with universities. They can't work, not the federal labs can take an equity. But if you look at what drives the U.S. economy, even in drug development, it's startup companies. So it really is amazing. So again, when you're running mass ventures and the money goes down the tube, does the government come back and say, hey, you really tried really hard here. Here's a big check for you because we want to make sure nobody's feelings are hurt? Or do you have to go back to your investors and say, sorry guys, it just went down the drain?
No, of course not. I mean, we take these risks. Of course, Mass Ventures is slightly different than a purely private capital firm in that we're impact first. But nonetheless, I mean, we're making decisions exactly the same as any other investor. There's a lot of risk. We know there's a lot of risk. But how do we mitigate that risk? Obviously, patents are one way to mitigate that risk. I might make another comment. So when I took over the BU Tech Transfer Office, I saw that there was some 300 patents that were unlicensed sitting on the shelf. So I asked them, what are these things? And so we started going through them. And we found a couple of patent families that we could assert on because we suspected people were infringing. One was our PI had invented the blue LED in the late 90s. And BU had sort of licensed it and made a little bit of royalty. But a lot of companies, especially in Asia, were infringing on the patent. So it had now become a $6 billion a year business. So we went after them, and we did quite well. You can see the annual report of BU one year that says we had a surplus because of this.
Yeah.
Without Bayh-Dole, we couldn't have done that. And we don't realize how much intellectual property we have in this country that other people are stealing from us. And we have to do something about it.
Well, what we found is if you don't enforce it, people will steal from you, and they'll laugh at you while they're doing it. You actually had a small company came into you with, I would imagine, a pretty high-risk idea about recycling toxic hospital waste. So was that company taking a risk, or was it sort of guaranteed that they were going to make money if they came and talked to you and they would just go out to the WVU medical centers and start selling this the next day?
Yeah, a huge risk, right? You're not just dealing with a waste stream, you're dealing with biohazards and all kinds of permitting. And so it wasn't just figuring out the technology itself, the reactor, like a component. You're also figuring out this entire business eco-structure that doesn't exist today. So it's a lot of risk for an individual to take on.
And Mark, you must have licensed a lot of small companies. So when they came in there with a gleam in their eye and a business plan and not much money, how did you make the decision about whether they were the best person, or were they the only candidate for some of the technologies you were looking at?
They're often the only person, but you still have to occasionally. Two companies were interested in the same technology, but you have to decide: do they have a good plan? Do we have adequate IP protection? Are they willing to invest? What is their strategy? And look at their overall plan and be flexible. If they have no money, then maybe we get money later rather than early. If it's a large company, maybe they can pay up front. But you need to be flexible and look at the opportunity in their business plans.
Well, again, I think this is why it's so important to have people here, because Washington is a town full of theory, and there's a lot of people with those theories who've actually never been outside the Beltway and actually never done anything realistically. But we need to make sure we have people who actually embody what really happens, what really drives the economy, and most importantly, these are people that take risks. When Edison invented the light bulb, people already had the idea about the light bulb. He was not the first one who thought of a light bulb. What he was the only person who went down to his laboratory literally 1,000 times trying a filament to make the light bulb work. Now, after he showed that, they had all kinds of people that were trying to invalidate his patent, saying, oh, I had the same idea. Yeah, you had the idea, you just didn't make it work. And so after Edison founded General Electric and became pretty well known, he had a young reporter come in and ask him one time, what did it feel like to fail 1,000 times? And Edison looked at him for a second and said, I never failed once. It was a 1,000-step experiment. Most of us would have said we've already failed that time. These are the people who are willing to do the 1,000-step experiment. And also, again, there's no guarantee for Edison the 1,000th time was going to work. It could have been, no, that didn't work either, but they didn't give up. So let's close with this. This is the 45th anniversary of the Bayh-Dole Act. Unfortunately, both Senator Bayh and Senator Dole are not with us anymore. But let's just go down the row. If you could say something to Senator Bayh and Senator Dole, what would you say to them for having actually made the Bayh-Dole Act possible?
Yeah, I guess I would say I would wish for them to be able to see the legacy, honestly. So I would want to explain that the impact that they have had on American innovation and competitiveness has been huge. I don't think it's something that the general public appreciates. And just thank you for that.
Jim?
First of all, I would say thank you. Secondly, I would say that it's very unusual to have something happen in Washington, D.C. that doesn't cost a lot of money
and hire a lot of people. It sculpts humanity, and it's been great. Thank you.
Rashina?
Yeah, so the Bayh-Dole Act has made my job possible in almost every way, and I had to educate myself on the act, and I think it will be one thing that I do is to educate more people on the Bayh-Dole Act.
Benit?
I would say that as two lifelong politicians, they really understood how the market works, this concept of decentralization. And the other thing, a little tongue-in-cheek, is two Midwesterners, it mostly helped the coasts.
Mark?
Thank you for your vision. It has succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dream and moved the U.S. from a time of economic uncertainty to a time of success and leadership in the world of high technology.
Well, as somebody who worked for Birch Bayh and actually worked with Bob Dole, I think I can really say with confidence, what they would say to you is, thank God you made our vision come true. So let's welcome our 2025 Faces of American Innovation Award winners. Congratulations on your award. You have time to meet with them. We have lots of food. Now, when I was on the congressional staff, we never left a room with free food in there without stuffing our pockets and eating as much as we could. So I hope that tradition hasn't gone away. But anyway, let's give a round of applause to our 2025 Faces of American Innovation Award winners.